This coming Shabbos is very exciting. We have Vayakel, Pikudei, Shabbos HaChodesh, Mevorach HaChodesh, Shabbos Chazak. It's the last Shabbos of the year from Chodshei Hashanah. There's so many things. So it's very, very, very exciting Shabbos this week.
We also have a guest speaker coming in.
Oh, very nice. Who's coming to speak?
We used to have a young man, I guess before COVID, that came to the United States to get his pilot's license. His father is a Rav.
Right.
And he's coming to speak. Rabbi Adler.
Oh, very nice.
So from Israel, so it's going to be a nice change for us. I guess he's going to be the
scholar in residence.
Yeah, like
very nice. Where's this? At Young Israel? Where's this?
Yes.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah.
And I think we also have someone else speaking on Sunday night.
Very nice.
Yes. So it'll keep us off the streets, as they say.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem. That's good. I just want to make sure I don't forget something, so I'm just writing it down. Okay. People are a bit slow in coming in today, but that's okay. It's Friday. It's a lot to do. Erev Shabbos. Although everybody has an extra hour this week, to prepare for Shabbos. So compared to last week.
Yeah. Right. So, but we don't think about it so much.
We don't think about it, right? With regards to your question about Sheshes Yomim, I have to confess, or concede rather, I couldn't find anything. I looked and I looked and I looked. Nobody even mentions it. So that I'm not saying nobody does. I'm saying that I looked, or from the things that I came across, looking in the different Gemaras where it comes up and the commentaries there, no one seems to address it. I thought maybe it's in Kabbalah, the first days of creation, the 6 days of creation are called Yemei HaBinyan, and maybe that's the source from which we derive permission to do any work at all on any day, is because Hashem showed us by example that you can do work, and that's why it uses it. But I don't know. I like it. It does strike me as being, not the usual way of being able to say something, straight, like Yimei HaShavua. You should say Yimei HaShavua Yechia. So I don't know. I'm happy for somebody else to share any insights that they might have, but I couldn't find anything.
Okay.
I apologize.
No problem.
And I did ask, somebody else, and he didn't have an answer. A guy, a Talmud Chacham, I asked him, and he's like, I don't know. So he says, a good question, but doesn't know the answer.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
As I was telling Reb Ezra, this Shabbos is a very special Shabbos because we have so many things. We have Vayakel and Pikudei together. It's Shabbos Mevorchim, the Shabbos which we bless the new month of Nisan. It's also Shabbos Parshas HaChodesh. It's one of the special 4 portions that we read before Pesach. And it's also the last Shabbos of the year, because we know that in Parshas HaChodesh we read how Hashem told Moshe that this would be the first of the new months for the months of the year, and that was Nisan. So therefore, Adar is the last month of the year. So this Shabbos would be the last month of the year according to the months as they appear in the Torah. It's also Shabbos Chazak because we conclude the book of Shemais. So there's a lot happening, and so it's very special. And I just thought of this now. You know, there's a machlekes in the Gemara. If I'm not mistaken, it's between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua as to when the world was created. Was it created in Elul, or was it created in Adar? Meaning, is Rosh Hashanah, was the beginning Tishrei, or was the beginning Nisan? And according to the opinion that it starts in Nisan, right, then the creation of the world was not Chafei Elul, but it was Chafei Adar, which is also the Shabbos. So we've got a lot to celebrate the Shabbos, according to Kabbalistic teachings, they're both right. One is b'machshava and one is b'maisa. In the thought of Hashem, it was Adar, but in the action, the way it came out was actually in Tishrei. Actually Elul. But anyway, be that as it may. So there's a lot to celebrate the Shabbos, and the best way to celebrate Shabbos is by preparing for Shabbos. When you prepare,
Isabella Travajegovitz. I'm trying to get a hold of Benji because I ran out of prescription and.
1 second. Put it on mute all. Okay, so I've just muted everybody, and if anybody wants to speak, feel free to unmute yourself. No problem. Okay, so what I would like to do today is, because the Gemara on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis is a whole new discussion about the laws of Tumah Tahara. It's kind of like the chapter in the second chapter all of a sudden takes a massive turn to a completely different topic, although as explained that by the commentaries that there's a reason for it, because people had to be pure on Yom Tiv, but nevertheless it's another whole discussion about, and an in-depth discussion about the laws of Tumah Tahara. So I just want to do a bit of a chazara on Daf Yud Zayin that we from the Mishnah, and then hopefully bring us up to the Mishnah on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, and then leave Yud Ches Amud Beis for next week, so that we can deal with Tumah Tahara starting from the beginning of next week. So I want to mention here at the beginning of the shir that this shir, like all the shiurim for this week, is dedicated in Le'ilu Nishmas Yecheved Bas Matisyahu. May our neshama have an aliyah, and may our learning be a merit for her neshama. So we started off. I'm just going to do it outside, but in the inside, we're going to pick up.
Who's the person you were talking about?
That is an excellent question. Rabbi Smith asked me if I could please dedicate the learning. However, he did not tell me the relationship of that woman to him, so I don't know. But it sounds like whoever it is, somebody sponsored the shiur in her memory, and so therefore we're dedicating all the shiurim of this week in her memory. And if anybody would like to sponsor further shiurim, they can be in contact with Rabbi Smith, and we're happy to dedicate it l'schus or le'ilu nishmas, whoever you would like. So now we are holding Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, and I'm going to start from Varesh Lakish, right? That's where I'll start from. But I want to just do a quick chazara to bring us up to speed. We started off the Mishnah on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, and we brought two opinions. We had the opinion of Beis Shammai, and we had the opinion of Beis Hillel with regards to leaning on an animal on Yom Tiv, whether it was the shlamim or the re'iyah. So we said that Beis Shammai said that you can bring the shlamim, but you don't do smicha. However, you do not bring the carbon re'iyah. Beis Hillel said that you bring the shlamim and you bring the oiles and you do the smicha. We also mentioned in the Mishnah that what they would do is on the Yom Tov of Shavuos, they would have a Yom Tavayah, which is a day in which you bring up the sacrifices according to Beis Shammai. And Beis Hillel, according to Beis Hillel, there really is no need for this Yom Tavayah. However, there's one case, one instance in which Beis Hillel would agree to Beis Shammai, and that was in the instance when the Yom Tavayah would fall after Shabbos, right? 1 second. She'im chol aliyis b'Shabbos, that if Shavuos fell out on Shabbos, then he would say that Yom Tavuach achar Shabbos, that the Yom Tavuach would be after Shabbos. And we go on to explain about why they had the custom that the Kohen Gadol would wear special clothes, would not wear special clothes if it fell out in that order, meaning if the Yom Tov was on Sunday, so as to stay far away and not give any credence to the opinion of the Tzedukim that Shavuos would always fall out on Sunday. That was the Mishnah. So then we had a discussion, how do we know that after Shavuos you have what's called Tashlumin? Tashlumin means the compensation for all the sacrifices that were supposed to be brought, and you didn't get a chance to bring it. How do you know you can have Tashlumin for Shavuos? We have it by Pesach, we have it by Sukkot, but how do we know about it by Shavuos? So we brought down a pasuk. It says, and so we said that since it's next to Chag HaMatzos, you have 7 days, so therefore we learn that you have 7 days also by Chag HaShavuos. Then we asked, 1 second, why don't we learn out from Sukkot as opposed to Pesach? It's also next to it. So we said that at the end of the day, Tefasta merubah lo tefasta. Although we mentioned the idea of regel b'fnei atzmai to kind of ask a question: are you sure that there's tashlumin for Sukkot even on Shmini Atzeres? Don't we say that Shmini Atzeres is a separate day? But we bring a proof to say that the truth is Shmini Atzeres is explicitly taught to be one of the days in which you can fulfill your obligation for the karbanos that you didn't bring during Sukkot. Okay, we mentioned that the idea of Shmini Atzeres being a regel b'fnei atzmai is only with regards to 6 things, and we discussed what those things are. There was pious as a lottery, Zman is Shechianu, regel is the idea of it having its own name. Then you had the idea of the karbanos, it had its unique karbanos different to the rest of Sukkot. Then you had the shir, it had a special shir that they would sing in the Beis Hamikdash on that day, and then the bracha, and Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi says this refers to blessing the king, and Tosfos says it refers to in Yalav Yavai having its own separate thing of Shmini Atzeres. Okay, then we went on to say, seemingly this teaching of Reb Oishia can be questioned because we find that we said that if Yom Tov of Shavuos, 1 second. Oh, no. Then we had a whole discussion as to this idea of Yom Tavayach and the discussion between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, right? And we said that we asked them why do we need to mention it twice and why did we need to mention two cases? We could have learned it just out from one case, and ultimately we explained that we need both cases. We need both cases because if we would only have one case, then might say that Beis Hillel would only agree to Beis Shammai in the particular type of schedule of how Yom Tov falls out, but in another case where it would fall out on a different day of the week, he wouldn't agree, and vice versa. And therefore, we decided that we need to have both of the cases brought down in the Mishnah. Otherwise, we would assume that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel would agree. Would agree. Now, what's interesting to note, by the way, is that it seems that possibly Beis Hillel ended up agreeing with Beis Shammai, although it doesn't say so. But it seems that, according to the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch, it seems that the minhag became that the oilos re'iyah were actually brought up on Yom Tavayach. The oilos re'iyah of Shavuos were brought up on Yom Tavayach because Hillel wanted to accommodate for the opinion of Beis Shammai with regards to that. Anyway, that's what's suggested. I'm not sure where the source of it is, but that's what's suggested. Okay. Then we come along and ask a question on Rav Yoshia, and we say, it says that somebody who did not bring up their korban on Pesach, and somebody who did not bring up their korban on Shavuos, and somebody who did not bring up their korban on Sukkot, right? Ultimately, they cannot come and compensate anymore. So Pesach, we don't have a problem because it has 8 days, 7 days. Sukkot, we don't have a problem. It's because it has 8 days. But Shavuos, it seems to be saying that you cannot bring it up after Yom Tov, right? So if you can't bring it up after Yom Tov, then that seems to be contradicting what Rabbi Shia says. So we say that no, you're reading it wrong. You shouldn't read it as Yom Tov. You should read it as Yom Tovayach. But still, even if you read it as Yom Tovayach, that's only 1 day. So he says, no, you should make an amendment. Don't read it as Yom Tov, but Yom Tovayach, read it as Yemei Tovayach. And so this way, that doesn't serve as a challenge to the teaching of Rabbi Shia about the Yemei Tashlomin. Then we came along and we said, maybe the fact that it says in the Torah to count the days of the month, it says Ad Chodesh Yomim, up until a month. So you count the days, and each day is 1 unit, and then you celebrate the Rosh Chodesh with the korban musaf on Rosh Chodesh, based on a unit, the unit that you use for counting. So maybe the same thing should be applied to Shavuos, because Shavuos, at the end of the day, you count 49 days, 50 days. And so therefore also use 1 unit, and it's just 1 day of Shavuos, and therefore or bringing up the korbanos should be just like Rosh Chodesh. You bring them up only for 1 day. So to Sukkot, you should only bring them up for 1 day. So we said that you cannot compare. You know why you can't compare? Because Shavuos is not like Rosh Chodesh, because Rosh Chodesh, you only count the days of the month. You don't count the weeks. Whereas when it comes to Shavuos, you count the days and you count the weeks, like Abaya says. It's a mitzvah to count the days and it's a mitzvah to count the weeks. And also, Shavuos is called the Festival of Weeks. And so therefore, it would make sense that you have a week for Tashlumin like all the other Yom Tovim. Now, although we've already got Rav Oshia's source for saying that Chol HaMoed is, that for saying, it's not Chol HaMoed, for saying that that you have Tashlumin for Shavuos. So we have another proof that we bring from Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, the Academy of Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, and he says that it says in the pasuk Ukrosem, and in the next pasuk it says Ukutzrechem. Ukrosem means that you will call the Yom Tov a special day, right? As the day of gathering for the people, right? It's a special day. And it also says, and when you reap your field, and the fact that you have these two psukim together, I ask you, which Yom Tov is it that you do reaping? So he says it must be the Yom Tov Shavuos. But can you do reaping on Shavuos? That's a malacha. So he said that, yes, it's true, it's a malacha, but we're not talking about the Yom Tov itself. We're talking about the days that are considered like Shavuos, in as much that you can bring the karbanos that you didn't bring up Shavuos during this week, right? So now, why do we need both? Why do we need Rav Oshia's, which brings it from the pasuk that puts Shavuos next to Pesach, and Reb Elazar ben Yaakov, and the other one that we just brought from Reb Elazar ben Yaakov. She says the reason why we need both is because if I would have only had the one from Reb Oishia, then I might have said that just like on Pesach, you're not allowed to do any malacha during Chol HaMoed. So too, you're not allowed to do any malacha during the week of bringing up those karbanos of Shavuos, even though it's a regular weekday. But because you're bringing up the karbanos, so if you're going to learn out that you can bring the karbanos only from Pesach, then just like those days of Chol HaMoed, you're not allowed to do malacha. So too, on the days after Shavuos, which are regular weekdays, because you bring up the karbanos, you cannot do any malacha either. That's why you have the other, you have the teaching from Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov that tells us that no, actually, we learn it also from Ketzira, right next to Ukarosem, to tell me that it is mutter in malacha. You can do malacha. And why do we need it the other way around? So maybe we just learn it from Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So he says, no, the reason why you need to have the other one is because if you just learn from Uvekutzechem, there's no designated amount of days in those psukim. It just says, and when you will reap, right? So it doesn't say how many days. Maybe it's just one day. Maybe it's just the Yom Tovayach. That's why we also learn it from the drasha of Rabbi Ishia that it's next to Pesach, and there it tells us clearly that there's 7 days, and that's the 7 days that we apply to Shavuos as well. And this is where we're going to pick up, and we're going to learn it inside. We did this already, but just for the flow, it's just it's easier to start from here. So another source in the Gemara, everybody have it, Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph. If you're looking in the art scroll, it's 18a1, and it starts with Veresh Lakish Oma. Another source for this idea that the Yemei Tashlum, the days of compensation for the karbanos, it says Rish Lakish Amar. Rish Lakish says in the pasuk V'chag HaKotzir, and the festival of the harvest of the first fruits of your labor.
How far down?
How far down? It's at towards the top. Towards the top. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. It's the second line.
Okay, I see. Thanks.
Okay, sorry about that. Reish Lakish said, and the festival of the harvest, and when it says Chag HaKotzir, the festival of the harvesting, so which Yom Tov is it that you actually bring a Karmel Chagiga and you also reap? So he says, you say, this is referring to Shavuos. Now, Amos, when exactly do you bring up the Karban Chagiga and reap? If you're going to say that you're talking about the actual Yom Tov of Shavuos, is it permissible to do Ketzira, which is reaping on Yom Tov? Not allowed to. Rather, isn't it that it's referring to the days of Tashlumin, and therefore these are considered to be Chag HaKotzir, the days that you bring up the Karban Chagiga, and you can reap as well, which are the Yemei Tashlumin. That is the proof that Rish Lakish wants to bring. Right? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yechanan said to Rish Lakish, according to your understanding, according to this logic, that you're telling me that because a Yom Tov is called Chag HaKotzir, and Chag HaKotzir cannot mean the Yom Tov of Shavuos itself, because you cannot bring up a Karban Chagiga and reap on Yom Tov, because you're not allowed to reap on Yom Tov. So then I'm going to apply that logic to Sukkot when it says Chag HaOsif, when it speaks about the festival of the ingathering. And what you're going to say is that Chag HaOsif means it's the day that you bring up the Chagiga and you do the ingathering. Frank the Gemara, Chag sheyesh b'yasifa, in what Yom Tov is there ingathering and you're bringing up a Karban Chagiga? So you're going to say that the Chag HaSukkos must be referring to Chag HaSukkos. Frank the Gemara, Amos, when exactly are you going to be bringing in the crops from the field? If you're going to say it's on Yom Tov, Melacha b'Yom Tov Mishari, is it possible to do this Melacha of gathering it in on Yom Tov? Now the question really is, what Melacha are you? Which one of the Lamates Malachas is this referring to? Right. So it seems that this would be the malacha of ma'amer. Ma'amer is gathering things together. Right now, it seems of all the lamates malachos, right? Besides carrying, which carrying rishus to rishus is is one that many people are perplexed with, because you're not, it's different than all the other malachos where you're actually making a change in the item, right? Ma'amer seems to be also one of those malachos, right? Where what are you doing already that constitutes a malacha? Why, when you gather we're not talking about gathering things that are still connected to the ground. That would be still katsira, like you're cutting things off. But we're talking over here where they're already cut off and you're gathering. What's the problem with gathering? So some people suggest that perhaps, if you think about it, the whole part of the idea of many of the Lamates Malachas is what's called Sidura de Pas. Sidura de Pas means this is the way we prepare bread. And when you're preparing bread, you need to go through all these different stages of the process to make bread. The idea of gathering the wheat is that without gathering it, you cannot make bread. Why? Because you can't make bread from one stalk of wheat. It just doesn't work. You've got to take a bunch of stalks of wheat, then grind them in order to make them into flour, and then make them into dough and make bread. So anyway, it seems that
Levi,
yes.
so they separating the cutting itself of the wheat to the collecting it into the high piles that they collect.
Correct.
Okay.
However, there are some opinions that say that you're only transgressing the lacha of ma'amer gathering if you tie them together. Like you gather them and tie them. That's according to some opinions. Other opinions is not even tying it, just gathering it itself is forbidden on Yom Tov, maybe because of Tirchi Yisera, an extra burden. But whatever the case is, it's forbidden. So you cannot say that it's on Yom Tov. So when are you going to say it is? Ela b'chol shamayid. You're going to come along and say that this malacha of asifa is going to be done on Chol HaMoed. But he says, Chol HaMoed, Mishari. Who allows that you, is it allowed for you to do the malacha on Chol HaMoed? You're not allowed to, right? It seems to be widely accepted that you're not allowed to do malacha on Chol HaMoed. El Chag Habo B'Zman Asifa. According to your logic, Reish Lakish, we must say that it's the Yom Tov that comes in the time of Asifa, because you cannot speak about the Yemei Tashlumin after Sukkot, because there are no Yemei Tashlumin after Sukkot. Yemei Tashlumin are only up to Shmini Atzeres. And during those days of Chol HaMoed, right, until the end of Yom Tov, you're not allowed to do Malacha. So therefore, you'd be forced to say that when it says Chag HaOsif, it means the time at the Yom Tov that falls out in the time of gathering. So Hachanami, so to over here, we must be Chag Habo B'Zman Ksira. It's got to be talking about the time that comes around the Yom Tov that comes around the time of harvesting. Okay, now here we get into a discussion about the prohibition to do any halacha and malacha on Chol HaMoed. It seems from this interaction that both of them, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yechanan, both hold the Chol HaMoed also basiyas malacha. That Chol HaMoed, it is prohibited to do any malacha. In fact, the Gemara, how do we know you're not allowed to do any malacha on Chol HaMoed? So we bring a proof from the following. The Torah Rabbanu says, it's taught in the Brisa. It says in the Pasuk Chag HaMatzos Tishma Shivas Yamim, that it says that you shall guard the festival of Matzos 7 days. Now, really, it should just say Chag HaMatzos Tishma, and then you go on to say Shivas Yamim, and it talks about something else, right? Talking about, I'm not mistaken. One second. And I think it's talking about eating matzah for 7 days, but whatever the case is, so we're just going to read it slightly differently and say that you read it straight, that for the Yom Tov, the Yom Tov of Pesach, you should guard all 7 days. Limay, that comes to teach us on Chol HaMoed, that what? That also Basiyas Malach, you're not allowed to do any labor on Chol HaMoed. These are the words of Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yonason says, "Ein tzarich." You don't even need to have a pasuk. Why? Kal v'chema. I have a logical argument where you can learn it from, right? That Kal v'chema, that Omar Rishon Shvi, just like the first day of, and the 7th day of Pesach, she'ein kedusha lifnei v'lachareihem. They don't have a day of kedusha before them and a day of kedusha after them, and nevertheless, also basiyas malacha, they are prohibited from doing any malacha on them. So Chol HaMoed, when you talk about Chol HaMoed, which is sandwiched between 2 days of Yom Tov, they do have holiness before them and afterwards. Isn't it logical that also basiyas malacha, that they should be prohibited from doing any malacha? Okay, the Gemara, 1 second. You're trying to bring a Kal v'chema from the fact that the first day of Yom Tov and the last day of Yom Tov don't have before or after them these holy days, and nevertheless they're chayav b'melacha. Whereas these days of Chol HaMoed are sandwiched between holy days, so therefore they shall be malacha. So he says, the 6 days of creation, which refer to the 6 days of the week, Sunday through Friday, right, will refute this reasoning. Why? Because we find Sunday through Friday have a holy day before them and a holy day after them, and nevertheless, and on an ordinary weekday, you absolutely are allowed to do malacha, right? So therefore, perhaps you cannot use this Kal v'chema of Rabbi Yonason. So it says the Gemara, no. Ma l'sheishis bereshis she'ein behen karban musaf. You can't make a comparison between sheish and bereshis and Chol HaMoed because the sheish and bereshis don't have a carbon in it. So time of Chol HaMoed sheish karban musaf. So then we can still say that on Chol HaMoed that does have a carbon musaf, because it's more special and it's sandwiched between days of holiness. Therefore, it should certainly be forbidden to do any malacha on those days. The Gemara, 1 second. How can I accept this argument? I have an instance of a regular day where there is a carbon musaf and you can still do malacha, and that's Rosh Chodesh. Says the Gemara, Rosh Chodesh Yichiach. Rosh Chodesh will refute this argument. Sheyesh be carbon musaf because it does have a carbon musaf. Umuta basiyas malacha, and nevertheless you can do malacha on Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, perhaps you cannot make a kal v'chema when it comes to Chol HaMoed. And for the Gemara, no. Ma l'Rosh Chodesh she'ein karu mikra kodesh. When we speak about Rosh Chodesh, you cannot compare it to Chol HaMoed. Why? Because on Chol HaMoed, it's called Mikra Kodesh. But when it comes to Rosh Chodesh, it's not called Chol HaMoed. And therefore, we say by Chol HaMoed, it's called a holy convocation. It's a holy time, right? Is therefore, Hayel V'karu Mikra Kodesh, Dinhu. It should be logical that that it's forbidden to do malacha. That's interesting. If you look at the last Tosfos on the page, it's a very short Tosfos. Tosfos asks a question, or doesn't really ask a question, but he's saying the Gemara could have answered, instead of saying that it's called Mikra Kodesh, could have said that Chol HaMoed, right, you have two things. You have Musaf, and you have the Kedusha before it and after it, right? Whereas when you talk about Rosh Chodesh, it only has Musaf. You understand? In other words, if you want to try and find the difference between the two, between Rosh Chodesh, and you want to find the difference between that and Chol HaMoed, so you can do exactly what they did in the one right before, when it said Sheshes Mei Bereshis, we said it's not the same as Sheshes Mei Bereshis because it has one additional thing, which is Karban Musaf. So the same thing you could say by Rosh Chodesh. It's not the same as Rosh Chodesh because it has two things, both the Musaf and it has the Kedusha before and after. However, for whatever reason, the Gemara has what seems to be a better argument, and that is that it's called Mikra Kodesh, and since it's called Mikra Kodesh, that certainly sets it apart from Rosh Chodesh as being more holy, and therefore you could still hold the Kal V'Chaima of Rabbi Yonasan and say that if the first days there should be also b'malacha, so certainly when it comes to Kol HaMoed, there should be also b'malacha. The only question is, I don't really know if I have a good answer for this. The only question is, if I'm going to make a Kal V'Chaima, right? So the Kal V'Chaima, how could you have, right? What is a Kal V'Chaima? You learn, right, from the more lenient to the more stringent, right? That's a Kal V'Chaima. You learn from the more lenient onto the more stringent. If that's the case, if you're turning around and telling me that Chol HaMoed is the more stringent, so then why would it be that Yom Tiv has more restrictions than Chol HaMoed? Seemingly, there should be more restrictions on Chol HaMoed than on Yom Tiv, right? Follow the logic. You said to me that Yom Tiv, the first day, is not preceded with a holy day. And the last day of Yom Tiv is not followed by a holy day. But Chol HaMoed, it has the holy day before and the holy day after, and it too is also called Mikra Kodesh, right? So therefore, it's a Kal V'Chaima. This is more stringent in a way. There's more reason to think that it should apply to Chol HaMoed. So seemingly, it shouldn't have less halachas and less restrictions than Yom Tiv, and yet we find that it does, because as we're going to discuss soon, there are a number of reasons why you can be more lenient when it comes to certain malachas on Chol HaMoed, which you cannot be more lenient when it comes to Yom Tov. Anyway, that's a question. If anybody has an answer, I'd be interested to hear.
So you say it's the opposite of Kal V'Chomer. It's Chomer V'Kal.
No. It is a Kal V'Chomer, but if you apply the rules of the Kal V'Chomer, right, then you at least apply the laws of the Kal to the Chomer.
Yeah.
Right? So, but we're not really applying the laws of the Kal to the Chomer. We're only applying some of them. And it ends up that the Kal is left with more restrictions than you have on Chomer. You understand my question?
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. It sounds opposite.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what the answer is. I mean, I could look into it more, but it just strikes me as a bit interesting. Okay. So now, this is where we got up to yesterday, and this is where we're going to continue further over here. It says we have another source for the prohibitions against doing malacha on Chol HaMoed. Tanya Idach, stored in another brisa, says in the pasuk, "Kol meleches avodah lo yisasu." You shall not do any malacha for this 7 days. Limeid al Chol HaMoed. So this comes to teach me that what? That on Chol HaMoed, which is the 7-day period, you cannot do any malacha. These are the words of Rabbi Yossi Glili. In other words, it says in the pasuk, "Kol malachas avodah lo yisasu," right? And within that is included Chol HaMoed. So therefore, we're not allowed to do any. We shouldn't be able to do any malacha on Chol HaMoed. Okay, so we learn it from a lav. Rabbi Akiva says, "Ein tzarich." You don't need it. Why? You don't need this exegesis from the pasuk. Harehu omer. It already says, "Eilem ma'adei Hashem." These are the appointed festivals of Hashem. Mikroi kodesh. Yeah. So therefore, what is the pasuk referring to? In Barishayin, if the pasuk is telling me that about the first day, Harikvar Nema Shabbosin, it's already stated as a Shabbosin. As a day of rest. So therefore, it can't be referring to the first day of Yom Tov. Im ba it says over here Shvi, but really it should be Shmini because we're talking about Sukkot, right? And if you're talking about Sukkot, it's not 7 days, it's 8 days. Pesach is 7 days. But it should stay in Bashmini if it's referring to the 8th days. Harei Kvar Nemar Shabbos. And it already says with regards to the 8th day that it's a day of rest. The pasuk has to be talking about Chol Hamoed. So we learn from here that there's a prohibition to do any malacha on Chol Hamoed. What would be the difference between the limit of Rabbi Yossi Aglili and the limit of Rabbi Akiva? Well, one's learning it out from a lav, and one's learning it out from an asay. If you learn it out from a lav, then women are included in the prohibition. If you learn it out from an asay, we know that any mitzvah asay, shazman garama, women are not mechuyev, and so therefore, perhaps they wouldn't be forbidden for them to do malacha on Chol Hamoed. However, we find actually that we'd say that the laws of not doing any work on Chol Hamoed, whatever is forbidden, is also equally applicable to women. So, we're left with the question then: if we follow Rebbe Akiva's view, so why can't women do malacha on? Why can't women do malacha on Chol Hamoed? Anyway, we'll leave that. It's a good question. So now we're going to bring another source. We're going to bring another proof to say that you cannot do malacha on Chol Hamoed. Tanya Idach, so in another brayse, it says, "Sheish yom techel matzah v'yem ashvi yatzeres l'Hashem." For 6 days you shall eat matzah, and on the 7th day, atzeres l'Hashem. Right now, what does this mean, atzeres l'Hashem? So the Gemara comes along and says, atzeres l'Hashem means as follows. Right? It means it should be restraint to Hashem. What does it mean? It means mashri otzor. Just like the 7th day is a day that you have to stop, meaning stop from doing any malacha. So too, af sheishes yom atzurin. So too, the 6 days that we just mentioned right before we said the 7th day you shall stop. They're also restrained from doing any malacha. Right? The Gemara, if that's the case, if that's the case, that you're going to learn the 6 days from the 7th day, then just like the 7th day, you're not allowed to do any malacha. So then the first 6 days should also be prohibited in the same manner from any malacha, which means to say that you wouldn't be able to do any malacha whatsoever on Chol Hamoed. Talmud Leima. That's why the pasuk says, "Uvayim hashri atzeres," and on the 7th day shall be a restraint, which means to say that by adding the word Uvayim hashri, right, what you're doing is you're separating it out from the first 6 days to tell me hashri also b'chol malacha. It's only the 7th day that you are restrained from doing all malacha. But the first 6 days, they're not restrained from doing all kinds of malacha. And here comes an interesting statement. From here, we see that the Torah gave over the discretion to the Chachamim to decide which malachas are forbidden and which malachas are not. In other words, since we are not saying that the 6 days are equal to the 7th day completely and entirely, and therefore it doesn't say lisase kol malacha with regards to Chol Hamoed, right? It's only the first day and the last day of Yom Tov. So therefore, how do we know which malachas are prohibited and which ones are allowed? From here, that the fact that the Torah separates the 7th day from the first 6 days tells us that really it is somewhat prohibited to do any malacha on Chol Hamoed. However, which malachas, yes, and which malachas no, was given over to the Chachamim. And there's a major machlokes over here between Rashi and Tosfos, which appears in a few places in Shas, where the question is whether the asiyas malacha on Chol Hamoed is derabanan or whether it's de'oraisa. According to Rashi, it's de'oraisa. That the psukim that we bring over here to prove that you're not allowed to do malacha on Chol Hamoed, these are not just asmachtas, as Tosfos says. Tosfos says they're just asmachtas, but they're not really clear mitzvahs in the Torah about not doing malacha on Cholamoid, whereas Rashi says, yes, it is clear. And I'd like, 1 second. To tell you which day is a Yom Tov when all labor is prohibited, and which day is which is permitted, which malacha is prohibited, and which malacha is permitted. So I want to do this Rashi over here with everybody. It's on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, right? And you'll see over here how Rashi comes along and says that really doing malacha is an Issa D'Oraisa. Kalaima, that means to say, since the pasuk says that they are restrained from doing malacha, but not all of them, and the Torah itself doesn't explicitly state asura. We don't know which one is actually permitted and which one is forbidden. So know, therefore, and see that this was only given over to the Chachamim, who know Lahavin, to understand to which ones to apply a lenient dispensation, like to an allowance, which ones to say are forbidden, and they will say which Yom Tov, I'll be Kiddush Hariyah, through the sanctifying, through the sight of the moon, right? In other words, how do we know when Yom Tov is? We don't know when Yom Tov is based on the Torah itself. It's the Torah telling us that on the 15th day of the month is the Yom Tov of Sukkot or the Yom Tov of Pesach, but it's the rabbis who have to decide whether they're going to be Mekadesh, the Levana, based on the testimony that they received. And there's very detailed considerations as to whether they are going to do it on the 29th day or the 30th day, based on many considerations. So we see it really is given over to the Chacham to decide which day is Asr and which day, in other words, which day is Yom Tov. So therefore, which day is Asr, which day is Mutar. And then also, so therefore, once they determine that the 15th day, based on the on the sanctification of the moon, is going to be Yom Tov, and therefore it's also an Ol Malacha, and which days are Chol Hamoed also b'Chol Malacha, which is not forbidden in Ol Malacha, and they'll tell, and on Chol Hamoed itself, they will tell you, which Malacha is also Davar she'einay Ovid. We know that when it comes to Chol Hamoed, there's exceptions to the prohibition to do malacha, and when you have something that is not going to be lost, right? If you refrain from doing it, then you cannot do it. But if you are going to lose significantly and it's something that passes, if then the Chachamim said that you can do that. Then which malacha is materis davar ha'avid, something that's going to be lost. In other words, a certain malachas, even if it's a davar ha'avid, even if it's even 1 second, eza malacha asura davar she'ena avid, eza malacha materis, that refers to davar ha'avid. Right. So sorry, I just clarify that. Yeah. So the Chachamim were the ones to tell us that the things that are mutar are things that are davar ha'avid, and things that are also things that are not davar ha'avid. Now, what's the difference whether we say that doing malacha on Chol Hamoed is the Raisa or the Rabbanon? What's the practical difference? The practical difference between the two is when you have a suffix, when there's a doubt. When it comes to anything that is D'Oraisa, we say suffix D'Oraisa L'Chumra. That anytime there's a doubt, when it comes to something that is biblical prohibition, then we say you have to be more stringent. But when it comes to suffix, the Rabbanan, then we say L'Kula, that you are less stringent. Now, with regards to the decisions about which ones are permitted and which ones are forbidden, according to some Mefarshim, this is actually Torah Sheba'al Peh. It was actually passed down to the Chachamim as Torah Shabbat Peh. Others say no, that it's completely the Rabbanon. Tosfos is of that opinion that is the Rabbanon. Before we go any further, I do want to bring up a few sources about Chol Hamoed. We are coming up to Pesach, and when we come to Pesach, right, comes to Chol Hamoed, I've seen, and it's sad that people are not very particular about, the way the Torah tells us to behave on Chol Hamoed. And that's why I want to share a few sources to discuss this, and then we'll finish off the Gemara. So let me pull up over here. 1 second, let me just make this a bit smaller so I can see it. Okay, so let's start with Pirkei Avos. It's a good one to start with, right? Everybody likes Pirkei Avos. And after Pesach, we're going to start reading Pirkei Avos. So it says over here, this is in Perek Gimel of Pirkei Avos, Rabbi Elazar Hamidoy says, somebody who profanes sacred things, and somebody who despises the festivals. And Rashi explains, over here refers to doing malacha on Chol Hamoed, and then it goes to mention a few other things. Somebody who embarrasses his friend, somebody who removes the bris of Avraham, somebody who's contemptuous of Torah words, right? Even though he has Torah and good deeds, he does not have a portion in the world to come. To me, those are very serious words. If it says that somebody who disgraces the Moedim and refers to working Chol Hamoed, so this is something to really take seriously. The next source I wanted to bring is Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Says Oid Amar Rabbeinu Zechron Levacha Hamavazes Chol Hamoed Afal Pi Sheyesh Biyodei Torah Ma'asim Tovim Ein Lechelek Le'Olam Haba. Right? So anybody who disgraces Chol Hamoed, even though he has in his hands Torah and good deeds, he has no portion in the world to come. And it says, what does it mean, somebody who disgraces? It means he doesn't honor it, with food, or with drink and food, or and with clothing, which means to say that really on Chol Hamoed, you should be wearing slightly more respectable clothes to show that this isn't a regular weekday. In other words, going out in a jeans and a t-shirt on Chol Hamoed, right? If you wouldn't be, wearing that on Shabbos, then you need to ask yourself, well, in what way am I showing that Chol Hamoed is more special than just a regular day? And therefore, you have to wear nice clothes. So Chol Hamoed is not just, regular weekdays sandwiched between two Yom Tovim. They're not regular weekdays at all. They're very special. The next thing I have over here is 1 second. I've got to make it a bit smaller because something's showing up over here. 1 second. A bit smaller. Let's see if I can see what I'm doing over here. Okay. Well, Rav Sheshes says, the same idea. Wow. That's saying as if you're committing idolatry. That's serious, right? And where's he learning this from? The Chsiv, as it says, it says in the Pasuk, right before it talks about keeping Yom Tov and Chol Hamoed, it says the verse, right? You should not make molten gods, right, for yourself. And then it goes on to say, the festival of Pesach you shall observe, and as we learned that as Chag HaMatzos Tishmar Shivas Yamim, right? That's what we learned from the Brisa that you learn from this pasuk that you're not allowed to do any avodah, you're not allowed to do any melacha on Chol Hamoed. And if you 1 second, yeah. So we see, yeah. Okay, so that's that source, and I just want to mention over here from the Talmud Yerushalmi, it says over here that Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel said that if you would have somebody to vote together with him, what he said is he would permit work on Chol Hamoed. Listen to this. You have to understand this svara. Really, you're not allowed to do work on Chol Hamoed. But what happened as a result of not doing work on Chol Hamoed, right? The rabbis, again, this is if you're going with the opinion that it's the Rabbanon, right? The rabbis come along and say, you're not allowed to do any work on Chol Hamoed. Why? He says the reason why they only forbade, let's go over here, they only forbade to work on the days of Chol Hamoed, in the intermediate days of holiday, so that they should eat and drink and exert themselves in Torah. In other words, don't do any work so that you can eat more and drink more and really give the rest of your time to learning Torah. But what he's saying is, but what people do is they eat and drink and they behave wantonly. In other words, it says in Pirkei Avos, it's good to have Torah and Yerushalayim because together they protect you from getting involved and getting caught up in nonsense and sin, right? So if you're going to come along and you're going to prohibit doing any malacha, so what's going to protect you from wandering and going on the streets and doing all kinds of crazy things? So he says, learning Torah, that was supposed to protect you. But now the people are not learning Torah. They're just eating and drinking and behaving meshuga. So if I had the koyach, he's saying, if I had other people to vote with me, I would say, let's abolish this idea of not doing malacha on Chol Hamoed. I'd rather that people do work on Chol Hamoed and not go off and start sinning. But what we see from here is that the whole idea of Chol Hamoed is a day that you have to respect, and a day that should be dedicated to learning and to serving Hashem and to respecting. So it's not just a common day where you can do whatever you want. And then the last source I wanted to bring is the Mishnah Berurah, where the Mishnah Berurah comes along and he basically gives us the 5 different cases in which we exempt a person from restraining from doing any malacha. He says, umuta b'miksason, when it says that it's permissible to do some malacha, he says, ha-malacha is ha-muturim b'chol hamoed, the ha-mutaris b'chol hamoed, the labors, the work that is permitted of chol hamoed, heim chamisha, the 5. Number 1, davar avud, something that's going to be lost. Im lo yasenu atav, you're not going to do it now, then you're going to lose it. So that's one case where the Chachamim said, if that's the case, you can do it. So if all your fruit are going to go bad, if you don't bring them in, you can bring them in, and so on and so forth. That's only a davar of it. But if things are going to be okay, if you leave it till after Chol Hamoed, you're not allowed to do it. And that would be true of business matters as well. If you have a business matter that needs to be done, however, there's going to be no difference between whether you do it on Chol Hamoed or you wait till after Chol Hamoed. You have to wait till after Chol Hamoed. The next thing is Tzorchei Hamoed, things that are needed for the Yom Tov. For example, like Oichel Nefesh, which is permissible. But Shar Tzorchei Hamoed Dafka Ma'aseh Hedjit, as we're going to see, Ma'aseh Hedjit means amateur things, meaning you cannot do things as a professional, right, on Chol Hamoed. But if, for example, something tears and you just need to do 1 or 2 stitches, like big stitches, right, which is not professional, then you could do it if you need it for Yom Tov. But b'shvil payil and she'ein lo ma yochel, if you have a worker, if he doesn't work on Chol Hamoed, he'll have nothing to feed his family. So then in that case, you are allowed to work. That kind of work you're allowed to do. But tzorchei rabim, and when it comes to the need of the community, then you're able to. Ma'aseh Hedjit, and when you talk about things that are amateur work, right? Afilu liyachid is able to be done. Now he goes on to say that there are some people that hold that the malacha on Chol Hamoed is the only Medivrei Sofrim, but others say that it's the Iraisa. So at the end of the day, you have to be careful, and it shouldn't be like other regular days of the week that have no kedusha at all. Anyway, but nevertheless, he concludes that they weren't scrupulous and they weren't stringent with them as days of Yom Tov Mamish, and therefore and they allowed the 5 things above. Okay, so that's with regards to Chol Hamoed, and one of the things that we do on Chol Hamoed, as with all the other days of Yom Tov, is according to opinions that are brought down in Shulchan Aruch. One of the ways to honor Yom Tov is by having a glass of wine. So there are people who drink an extra cup of wine every day of Chol Hamoed as a way to honor the Yom Tov and also to have more food and so on. One of the things we don't do on Chol Hamoed is we don't write, and we don't sew, we don't do laundry, we try not to do business as much as possible. So that's that. Let's finish off the Gemara. So we said the Mishnah concluded, that it's permitted to engage in eulogy and fasting, so as not to uphold the words of those who say that Shavuos is after Shabbos. But usually, we're talking about on Yom Tovayach. On Yom Tovayach, we said that you are allowed to do eulogies and fasting, but that's an exception only for Shavuos. Frankly, Gemara, how can you say that? Because somebody has a hand up. Yes.
Yes. One of the concerns at Chol Hamoed would seem to be that if you have, let's say, a business situation where you had to go to a meeting or else you would lose a substantial sum. Okay, yeah, and you had to drive to get to the meeting. It would be mutter to drive. But that doesn't mean that you can generalize and say that you can drive wherever you want.
Okay, that's a good point. So it comes out that there are a number of things that are permissible to do on Yom Tov. Give me a second. There are a couple of things that not on Yom Tov that are permissible to do on Chol Hamoed, and one of them is to light a fire. That is permitted on Chol Hamoed, whereas it's not permitted on Yom Tov. 1 second, I just want to see if I still kept the source open for that. No, I didn't. I didn't keep the source open. I'll get that source for you. Where it says that it's actually permitted to do certain works on Chol Hamoed. 1 second. Yeah, the exception things are carrying items that are not needed for that day, right? Which on Yom Tov is not allowed to do. You're not allowed to carry things that you don't need for that day. Moving muktzah items is allowed on Chol Hamoed, which is not allowed on Yom Tov. And lighting a fire is also allowed on Chol Hamoed, not allowed on Shabbos. But why? So we'll have to go back to the Mishnah Berurah and see which things and why they are permitted.
My concern would be, I mean, if you're preparing food, you can light a fire, okay? But
right, you can't do that on Yom Tov.
You can't do that on Yom Tov. I'm talking about Chol Hamoed, okay?
Right, Chol Hamoed you are allowed to, yes.
You are. Okay, so I guess my point is that if you can rely on the fact that you can light a fire for preparing food, that doesn't mean that you can. Does it mean you can light a fire for any purpose, even if it's shtus?
Well, we know that it's permitted to smoke a cigarette on Shabbos, and that's a shtus. It's not even healthy. So there are other issues. But
on Shabbos?
No, on Yom Tov. On Yom Tov. You have
You
to
said
take
Shabbos.
I said Shabbos. I'm sorry. No, I meant Yom Tov. You're allowed to smoke a cigarette on Yom Tov, and that is because once you permitted to light from one thing to another thing, we permitted the use of that light for other things like warming your house if you needed to. Once you have an existing flame, you can use that. And I would generalize that also out to anything once you've made it permitted on Chol Hamoed. In one area, you can also do it in another area, unless explicitly we say that no, it's only under certain circumstances that you can do that. So when we say davar ha'avud, right? Something that's going to be lost. That would be, for example, in business, it's only something that you're going to incur a substantial loss that we say that you can engage in that business, but you cannot engage in it for any other reason.
Rabbi, you said that you can transfer fire to light a cigarette on Yom Tov.
Yes. You can take a cigarette and you can put it on to the gas stove, right? And have the gas, the fire that is already alight, or a yahrzeit candle that is already alight, and get a light for the cigarette, and then you can smoke that cigarette. And many people do.
I didn't know that either.
However,
I mean, I understand, transferring a light in order to, for the Yom Tov light, so that you can use it as a transfer for other things. But I never expected it for a cigarette. The cigarette has no,
no need.
You can't even. It's not ochel nefesh.
Right, but the principle is like this. Once they permitted it for Eichel Nefesh, they permitted it for everything. So if you think about it, why are you allowed to carry on Yom Tov? I'm talking about when there's no Eruv. Why are you allowed to carry on Yom Tov? Only for Eichel Nefesh. And yet everybody's bringing their kids to shul on Yom Tov. Why? Because once the Chachamim learned from the Torah that the Torah makes an exemption for the things that fall into Eichel Nefesh, once that malacha was allowed, they allowed for everything. And that's why you can carry your keys and you can carry your talis and you can carry everything on Yom Tov when there's no Eruv, right? You can carry on Yom Tov. Why? Because once they said you need to carry flour, you need to carry bread, you need to carry any food from one place to another place. Therefore, we allow you to carry in general. And the same thing applies to lighting a fire. Once we allow you to light a fire on Yom Tov for Eichel Nefesh, we allow you to use a flame that has already been lit to transfer that fire to another fire for any use. Anyway, I wish everybody a wonderful Yom Tov. We're talking about Yom Tov. A wonderful Shabbos. I wish you all a wonderful Shabbos. And as Hashem will pick up from here. There's only a small shtickle left, and then we will go into the laws of Tumah Tahara on Daf Yud Chet. Looking forward. But bring your Gemara head for next week. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shabbos, everyone. Bye-bye.
Shabbos.